All right, I saved the best for last. Dancing flute. This is one that's not only a go, no-go test, but if you've got helpers especially, you could use this one to... Hey guys, welcome back for another video. This is the start of an educational series I'm going to be doing on training your ears to get the best results out of your system. It's going to be both free stuff like today, working on placement and settings and other things like that, and then later on, maybe some equipment swaps to see what kind of changes that is going to be. But today is all about toe-in, the relative angle of the speakers left and right as they point either forward or towards you in the system. I have my speakers about 11 feet apart. I sit 11 feet back from each speaker, so they are just about an equilateral triangle. That was pure coincidence, though. The toe-in on mine right now are off because the system has changed since the last time I did physical placement of these. So it's a good time now where I can kind of start from scratch here and show you how I do it. And there are tons of different ways you can do it. But toe-in is so important because it's one of those things where if it's not right, or right enough, I should say, it doesn't matter what else you have. It doesn't matter if you have $1 million system, you have the best room treatment, amps, processors, all that. If your toe-in is wrong, you will never have great imaging, period. Doesn't matter what kind of processing you have, doesn't matter what kind of software you're running. It can't make up for the fact that the speakers need to be aimed and placed in the right point. Now, when I say toe-in right or not, there isn't one specific right toe-in. It completely depends on each specific room and system. And by system, I mean everything. The specific speakers that you're using, the room layout, where you're sitting, etc., etc. You have to do this by ear. And unfortunately, it's not something that conveys through recording. It has to be done in person because it deals so much with psychoacoustics, the way your brain reacts to the sound that's coming in through your physical ears. There's no way to record psychoacoustics and transmit it. So let me show you what I've done. There are tons of different ways to do all of these steps, but there's just a couple core principles that you need to take into account, and then you can figure out how you want to do everything yourself. This is set up only for one seat. Toe-in can only be done for one sweet spot. One perfect position. Everything else can still be good, but it will never be perfect, and you can never have more than one sweet spot for setting toe-in. It's just the way it works. So what I've got is a piece of painter's tape on the top of my speakers here, and you may not need to do this if you've got speakers that have perfectly flat tops and perfectly straight sides. These are also curved in. So real simply, what we need to do is find a way to reliably and accurately measure how far we're rotating the speakers so that we can evaluate results, change it, or go back to a specific point. What exactly you do is going to depend on the floor, your speakers, if they have feet or spikes or they're flat-bottomed, whatever. You can either come up with some kind of marking system at the speaker, or what I did is just put some tape along the back. If you don't have a wall nearby, you could just put up a couple chairs or whatever and string some tape or do whatever you need to do. This is simply a way for me to mark without putting any marks on the wall or anything. And what I'm going to do is shine a laser line and then mark on here where each speaker is pointed. So you can see that mine are toed out, toed in being directly towards your head, toed out is out the other way. You can see that mine are toed out pretty far. So this is my sweet spot. This is my center seat. Most of the time, you're going to be toed in somewhere between directly at you and straight ahead. Now, straight ahead would be about way over here, just about in line with my surround. So I'm toed in, about that much. That works out to maybe 10 degrees or so. So not all that much. Now, right now, I do have very nice imaging, but I'm missing a couple things that I know is there in the recordings, one of which is soundstage depth. I don't have a lot of it. There are some recordings where I can hear there's a little bit of a layering, maybe some drums behind a singer a little bit. That's about it. But I've heard other systems where you've got feet of soundstage depth in a lot of different songs. So I know that there's more that can be done, and I want to get as much out as I can out of this system, although obviously I am very limited. These are only a couple feet from the wall, not ideal. You know, if you want the very best possible everything, your speakers need to be, you know, quarter, third of the way into the room, depends on the room, the speakers, but a lot more space. So what I've done to start is just mark my reference point. So I can always go back to exactly where I was for any particular reason. Now on the bottom here, I've also just put some painter's tape under a couple of the feet and marked them with a Sharpie so that I know the exact placement they were in. Again, if I want to go back to that position for any point. Now what I've done to aim these, because my sides are not straight, if they were, all you have to do is look down them if you can get behind the speaker. But I can't because these are curved. So I found the center line and then just drew it real quick on some painter's tape. And then I have my laser level. And all I do is align that with the line I drew. And boom. Now I know exactly where that speaker is aimed. Now ideally you would have two helpers, one at each speaker, and they would simply be rotating a little bit at a time equally. And you would be sitting in your sweet spot listening to a few test tracks and telling them, okay, a little more, a little less, go back the other way, et cetera, et cetera. And you can have this entire thing nailed down in probably under 10 minutes, no joke. If you've only got one helper, well, they can just go back and forth between the speakers, still very quick and easy. If you're like me and you have nobody interested in helping with that kind of thing, it's going to take a lot longer because you're going to be getting up and down, you're going to be rotating the speakers, then coming back, resuming playback, giving yourself a minute to acclimate, and then trying to decide if one was better than the other. When you're just listening to something and it's still playing and you've got people able to move the speakers real time, you will hear the effect immediately in real time. That's why it's so much faster. But you can do it alone. Just takes a lot longer. Now, as for how to rotate your speakers, this again depends on the speakers themselves. Just be careful. What I'm going to do is I chose the rear inside foot that I'm going to pivot on. So I'm only going to move from that point. I can gently tip these onto just one foot very carefully. If you have very heavy speakers and your feet don't look that stable, I don't suggest you do that. You know, do whatever you have to do. You could put furniture sliders under there and rotate that way. Whatever you have to do, just make sure that you're not going to damage anything. Listening volume is also something that you're going to have to dial in by ear because there's no magic number, there's no magic level. It completely depends on your room and your conditions. But what you're looking for in general is the volume of the system to be loud enough to be over your noise floors so that you can hear all the details, but not so loud that the room modes are exciting and you're getting too much built up energy in the room. And that can smear the image, make the bass muddy, and that kind of thing. The first two tests I want you to do with these tracks is just to get a baseline for your own ears. I want you to point your speakers straight forward, have a listen, and then point them straight at you and have a listen. Now, neither one of those positions is apt to be what you're going to end up with, but you need to experience it so that your brain knows exactly what the differences between those 2 points are. Then we can start critically listening. Now, what I find most often is there are certain aspects of the soundstage and the music that will lock in sooner than others. For example, as you start to get close to whatever your correct position is going to be, you're going to see the center, or here I should say, you're going to hear the center position lock in first. That's going to be the first thing when you start to get in the ballpark that's going to fall into place. There's going to be a pretty wide range of angles where you still have a good locked in center image. Other things start to lock in as you get in a smaller degree of space. The next thing I usually see is the image starting to go beyond the speakers and being able to point out if there's placement in between the center and side points, as opposed to them just being, well, you know, I'm hearing somebody kind of around here. then you'll start to hear it here, or you'll start to hear it here. You'll be able to just close your eyes and point to people or instruments. That's how things start to lock in. Then the last thing that I find that locks in is your sense of depth to the image. And that's, I mean, it can be just a degree or two. It can be such a slight movement to get that level of refinement. You may not get that last level of refinement. You may be, moving them 3, 4, 5 degrees and not hearing any difference between that. Everything will still sound great, but you're not hearing any difference in that last little bit. That could be your room, it could be your speakers, could be your processing, could be the source, could be lots of things. But just know that's the order of things that I find as they start to lock in as you get everything dialed in. And then lastly, speaking of source, you absolutely, positively must have a top grade source. I'm using Tidal Connect. I'm on their hi-fi plan or whatever they're calling it now. I get the full FLAC files. Other services, as long as they have that level of file, you're good. If you're on vinyl, you've got a great analog system, you're good. If you have some basic free music streaming service, forget it. You're not going to be able to dial things in because you don't have the proper source. You must have the highest quality streaming service or CDs, etc. I just noticed my table is off center. That's better. And before we start the songs and listening and all that kind of good stuff, one other quick thing, make sure your equipment is warmed up. This one surprised me. It was something that I recently had a revelation about. Even if you have solid state components, such as I do, I don't have any tubes in my system. If you've got tubes, you know this already. You must have your equipment up to operating temp. For solid state equipment, that simply means have everything powered on. You don't have to be playing anything, just power it on, let it set for at least 15 minutes so that all the internal components can come up to their normal operating temp and reduce the variances. I was very shocked that that has an audible difference in your soundstage, especially near the end. Now, you can do this process however you like. I'm a visual person, so I make notes and diagrams and all that kind of good stuff. Basically, I've already gone through where I had them before, just as a baseline, and I've detailed my notes about what I'm hearing, and I actually draw out the speakers, where the singers are, where anything notable is about an instrument, things like that. Things in each track that I'm specifically listening for. And I'm going to go through each one of these with you so you can listen for the very specific things and then see how your system's doing and how the changes affect that. If you're doing this for the first time, don't expect to just immediately get stuff. You're going to have to re-listen. You're going to have to listen to the differences after you make changes to really understand what you're listening for. I hope that makes some sense. But I'll put the playlist down below. Mine's on Tidal. I'll list all the tracks so you can look them up however you want to listen. So now I've got them towed in directly at me, and here's a quick tip to quickly gauge if you're in the ballpark or if you want to tow out a little bit more than wherever you're at. Just start sitting forward a couple feet. Move back and forth like this in the seat as something is playing, and you can hear if there's going to be a difference real time, what that's going to do. So if you're noticing that you get more details or a deeper sound stage, or more critically, that things just sound more real to your head as you move forward, then that means you need a little bit more toe out than whatever you're at now. The other big tip I've got, and this is kind of a confirmation, not a during test kind of thing, but once you get it dialed in, the better dialed in you get it, you're going to see a bigger difference between good and bad recordings, or I should say really great recordings and just okay recordings. The really great stuff, you're going to hear things you've never heard before, and everything else is just going to sound like, well, that's nothing special. Maybe it's just going to sound like everything's almost in mono. You're not going to notice that the speakers disappear. You're not going to hear things beyond the speakers. That's most recordings. The really good stuff is the exception. But if you don't have your setup really dialed in, everything just kind of sounds the same. You don't have the huge spread between the great stuff and the just okay stuff. All right, I just wrapped up, found my new positioning. Let me show you where I'm at now. Not too far off. Ended up going a little bit wider. So the blue marks there, the blue tape and the ink marks were where the feet were. So you can see I just rotated a little tiny bit. I can show you exactly where I'm aimed now. Just a little bit wider, just a few degrees, but it made a very obvious audible difference. That tape there was where it was previous. So now I'm pointed out there. Not quite straightforward. I'm still going to run through all my notes with you for the different songs, but to dial this in, I have literally one song, about 30 seconds of a passage that will let you completely nail your toe in. The funny thing is, it's not even in my original list of tracks. It's one of the bonus tracks that I just use for verifying things at the end. But as I was running through and rotating and listening, I heard something very distinctive, and it makes a difference if it's too wide or too narrow. And when you get it dialed in, very specific things to listen for. I'll go through that at the end. Let's start with the really easy stuff to get you in the ballpark. Start out with Norah Jones' Little Room, and not specifically because we're going to be using it to test much, but because it's a litmus test. It is recorded with a very distinct center image, so even when you have these pointed straight out, you're still going to have a very distinct center image. However, what changes is the tonality of it and how believable it is. It will go between sounding just diffuse, and when I say diffuse, imagine someone talking to you from the next room. You know where they are. You can hear the direction. Maybe they're down a hall. Their voice is coming from down that way. Now imagine if they were standing 10 feet in front of you right here in the corner of this rug, speaking to you. That's the difference between believable 3D and diffuse. Okay? So when you're too wide, you get diffuse sound. It's still going to be coming from here in space. You can still close your eyes and, point to where the sound is, but it's not going to sound like a real human standing in your room. So what I want you to do is listen to Norah Jones really quickly. You don't have to play the whole track because the whole track sounds the same, but play 15, 20 seconds of it with them pointed forward, then toe in all the way, play it again, and you will distinctly hear the difference that I'm talking about. Next up, Spanish Harlem. Skip to the second half of it where the music really starts playing. The vocals are about the same all throughout, with one exception right at the beginning of the track, the first 10 seconds or so, where it's very quiet and she starts to sing and breathe. The microphone in the studio is picking up all the studio notes and reflections and all the ambient sounds. If your noise floor in the room is really low and you're playing at a correct system volume, and it doesn't matter what your toe in is, you should be hearing those sounds. If you're not, correct that first, because going forward, you need to be at that right level. But the second half of Spanish Harlem, you should hear the shakers pretty close to your right speaker, but not in it. If you're hearing all the sound from the I don't know what the instrument's called, but the shakers. If they're coming from your speaker, if you can point at the sound and it's at your speaker, you're wrong. Okay? It should be somewhere around here. She is actually a little bit diffuse in the recording. She's not locked on like Norah Jones, but she's still in the center, should still be believable, but she's pushed back a little bit further. And the further back that type of sound in a recording is, the more diffuse it's going to be. If you have something recorded where it's very forward, very shouty, kind of like playing on horns, then that's going to be a very close source in the recording. Speaking of forward recordings, Royals is a very good example of that. She should sound very clear, very distinct, and it should sound like it's more forward in your room. You may not sound like it's 5 feet in front of your speakers or anything like that, but it shouldn't sound like it's distant. If you play Spanish Harlem and then Royals, you will hear the difference without a doubt. If you don't, you're not there yet. Now, this is a track where your bass balance plays a huge role in your system. If you've got too much bass, this track will muddy everything up, and especially the vocals. So if you're having trouble understanding her, turn your bass down. I mean, it shouldn't be boosted for doing this anyway, and you shouldn't have any subs on. But it's just a telltale sign that your bass is actually boosted too much, because it's going to smear everything. You should hear a ton of ambient details, especially in the first 30 seconds of the song. It has a lot of studio reverb and echo, not just in the bass notes, and they should hit very cleanly, like da-dung, and you should hear it very deep, and it should be ringing, but it should have very distinct bass notes. It shouldn't be a tone. Her vocals shouldn't be interfered by the bass at all. Next up is Take 5, and there's 2 points in this that I want you to listen to. The first half of the song, you're primarily paying attention to the saxophone presentation. Now, this is a hard hand jazz track with drums primarily coming just around the left speaker, piano just around the right speaker. Don't worry if it actually sounds like they're coming out of your speakers. They are not supposed to disappear in this particular case. However, the saxophone should sound very believable, should sound very clear and a bit forward in your room. The other thing to pay attention to, and also if you're not getting that saxophone locked in, make sure that your distance is equal between your left and right speakers, not just the toe. And this is a very sensitive track to the left and the right positioning of your listening spot. If you're not actually aligned correctly, that saxophone will just collapse into one of the speakers very, very easily. So if you're getting that center saxophone, you know that you're dialed in with your positioning at least. Now, the other really interesting thing is in the back half of the song, right around the 4-minute mark, the drums are kind of winding down. It's getting very quiet. There's no sax. But as that drum starts to do its little solo, what you'll hear in the center image of the room is the reverb of the drums. You'll hear the drum hits, and then as the hit kind of starts to taper, you'll hear it very clearly. I mean, it's like you're in the studio. If you're not getting that, keep working. Next up is Tin Pan Alley. I just noticed I've got a spot there. I think it's from one of my ceiling lights. Yep, there it is. If I block it with my hand. I was wondering what that was. Thought it was on my lens there for a second. Anyway, Tin Pan Alley, there's a couple things to easily spot and listen for. First up, the first 3 minutes are all instrumental. What you should notice is that the sound is slightly coming from beyond the speakers. This is a track where you shouldn't be able to pinpoint where your actual physical speaker boxes are. Everything should be just in a wall of sound in front of you. You've got a lot of reverb. I don't know if this is in a large studio space, but it sounds like it's in a large room. It sounds like the recording. Either he's in a small jazz club or it's in a very large studio space. That's the effect of the actual reproduction. Now, what you want to listen for in that first 3 minutes, you're going to hear cymbals, and they're just kind of floating, not at the speaker, not in the center, but kind of around this area somewhere. And then there's, I don't know if they're hitting the edge of a drum with a stick, but it's a harder and that's just to the left of the cymbals. And then as the drums come in, they're slightly behind where those are there. Now, I don't know what the recording of the guitars are, if it's multiple guitars or multiple mics on the guitar, or if it's just a studio effect, but the guitar notes dance. As he's playing a riff or up and down the neck, they're kind of doing this in space. So I'm not sure if that's an artificial. I can almost hear it kind of circling. And that's why I kind of think it's a production effect, maybe panning the actual recording sound in playback. I'm not sure. But the effect in the room is you get this subtle dancing of the notes. The guitar is not locked in a certain space. But at the 3-minute mark, he starts to sing, and he is right there in front of you. It sounds like he's just grabbing the mic stand and singing in your room. It should be very clear, should be slightly forward, should be in front of the instruments. You should be able to sense that he is standing in front of especially the drums, because they're not too far away from each other laterally, but you should be able to get a little bit of depth. It's not a huge effect, but you should be able to pull it if you're dialed in. Next up, Steely Dan's Asia. Start about 3 minutes in. Nice instrumental section here. What you're listening for is the difference between it being too collapsed, everything kind of squished towards the center, or not. I actually find this one where I can't toe out too much because it still sounds great, even pointing straight forward. So this is kind of a go, no-go for being too toed in my opinion. But what you want to listen for is 3 minutes to 3.5 minutes or so. You should hear a spread of things. Now, most of the sound should be near the center, very believable, especially the guitar that comes in. But you should hear cymbals and other effects between the speakers. When you're toed in too much, this one very quickly collapses everything towards the center. And this track will end up sounding like Norah Jones' Little Room if you're toed in too much. So play this one as just kind of a quick test. If you're getting most of your sound from your center, you know that you need to come out a little bit more at least. Next up is So What? What you're using this for is to discern your depth. If you end up toeing in too much, what happens to this track is everything just sounds like a wall of sound. You'll still get great image left to right. You'll still be able to differentiate very distinct instruments and things like that. But here's what you want to listen for: the upright bass, especially compared to the horns. The upright bass should sound like it's 10 feet behind everything else, just off to the right. Now, this is another very hard pan track, so the speakers don't really disappear. The drums and the cymbals especially are pretty much coming out of the speaker. That's okay, it's supposed to be that way. Piano is very hard pan to the left, but it's just slightly inside. It sounds like it's piano sized. I mean, it sounds like it's coming from this amount of area, not just out of the box. So don't worry about that. The horns should be right here. I mean, they should be in your room, very believable, but that bass is really what you want to listen for. It's not as loud as the other instruments. So this is why your noise floor especially is important to get right, but it should sound like you should hear every strum, every pluck, and it should just be sitting back there 10 feet. If you're not getting that sense of depth in your head, you shouldn't have to think about it. Try toeing them out more until you do. Okay, this is another kind of litmus test. Go, no go. Should be very easy. And also on this track, the recording itself has a terrible noise floor. There's going to be a constant, fairly centered hiss in the recording, so don't worry about that. Now, you can listen to the whole track. It's a wonderful song, but if you skipped about the 8-minute mark, that's going to have everything you need to really differentiate the different stuff. If you just want to listen for that bass depth, first minute is all you need. Now, here's a couple you don't need to use to listen to specific things. These are just checks. After you think you've got everything dialed in, you should be able to play these and not have to do anything. You should just be astounded by the difference, hopefully. Now, I'm not going to lie, I hate this song. There are just certain songs, certain artists where it's just not for me. And unfortunately, this is one you hear all the time at every single audio show. For good reason, though. It is an exceptional recording, and it brings out so many believable 3D effects, and that's Keith Don't Go. What I suggest you do is you play it directly after you listen to the Miles Davis track, because they're both excellent recordings, but one is half a century old, the other is completely modern, and it's going to jump out at you the difference in recording techniques and quality. You should feel like you are live sitting in front of Nils as he's performing for you. That's how believable it is if everything is dialed in. You should especially be hearing the textures of the guitar plucks. That's kind of what this track is known for, but it's what is never there when your system is not dialed in. You'll just hear the music, but you won't feel the effect of somebody playing an instrument in front of you. I got one more track just as a final test, and that's bubbles. The first 10 seconds is all you need out of this song because what you're listening for is 3D layering. What you should get, you're going to hear these, I don't know if they're marbles or ping pong balls or whatever, but the whole track is about the soundstage. It is a fantastically produced track. I don't know if it's live effects or in studio, but I don't care. It sounds awesome. It's fun to demo. Hardly ever hear it at shows because it's not exciting, but if you're in the one sweet spot, it is astounding. What you get in those first 10 seconds, you should hear the first couple drops, and then the drops after that should get progressively back. And by 10 seconds, 15 seconds in, the effects should actually be in your head, like headphones. And I'm not exaggerating. If you don't hear the effects coming all the way back to your seat and wrapping around you, you're not quite dialed in yet. If you're close, you're still going to hear all the effects, and this is a track where the sound goes way beyond the speakers and they should completely disappear. You should be able to close your eyes and never be able to point to where your speakers are. The sound should just be coming from all points in space, all throughout the track. But it has tremendous 3D effect in its layering, and you have to get it dialed in order to get that effect. That is the last thing that comes when you're dialing in your system. Next up is one of my favorite tracks from Dire Straits, Telegraph Road. It's a very long track, but it's one that's extremely pleasurable to just sit down and listen to because it incorporates absolutely everything. Locked in center image, very believable 3D space, tons of ambience, instruments all over the place, speakers disappearing, lots of depth on the stage. It should sound like a live recording. Going along with Little Room, just the first 30 seconds of Don't Know Why from Norah Jones is another one that's a very quick, easy go, no-go test. If you're towed in too much, everything is going to start to collapse. What you should hear is a very clear distinction between instruments, between the speakers. This is a very spread out track. She should be dead center. Not quite like Little Room, but she should be in this area, and she should have some height also above Little Room. But the instruments should just be in space, should be very defined. But if you're not getting that locked in center image and everything's spread out, then you know you're towed in a little bit too much. All right, I saved the best for last. Dancing Flute. This is one that's not only a go, no-go test, but if you've got helpers especially, you could use this one to really dial this in quickly because here's an effect that you need to listen for that'll tell you instantly if you're too out or too in. Start about 1 minute 55 seconds. You should hear the flute directly to your left. I mean, like over here, way beyond the soundstage and way into your room. I'm not kidding. It should sound like you've got a speaker on your wall to your left that the sound is coming out of. And he's starting to dance across the stage and he comes towards the center and ends up around here as he's playing. Here's the effect. If you're towed out too much, what this sounds like is actual reflected sound. It sounds like the sound is coming out of the speaker and what you're hearing is the sound bouncing off of a wall. I mean, that's what it sounds like. That's not what I'm hearing, but that is what the effect sounds like. Everybody knows what that sounds like, hopefully. If you don't, go test it. But it doesn't sound natural. It sounds like reflected sound off of a wall. And it's not that the sound is actually bouncing off your wall. It's psychoacoustics. So if you are towed out too much, it's going to sound like a reflected sound off a wall. If you're towed in too much, what you get, you still might get some sound to your left, but what you're going to hear is when he's playing off to the side, it sounds like the headphone effect. The sound starts to get locked in your head. And what you're listening for is no difference in the sound of the flute as he crosses from outside to inside the speaker. All of the time he's walking and playing, that flute should sound identical. It should sound real. The tonality should be the same. There shouldn't be any effect in your head between one or the other. If you can play that and there's no effect change, you got it. If you got a reflection sound, you're out too much. If you've got a headphone sound, you're in too much. But that's it. Just keep repeating that 20 seconds or so until you get no effect. And you got it, man. It is that easy. And once you get that nailed in, you will see how small of a change, how small of an angle change it takes to get it dialed in. So I'm super excited that I discovered this little passage and that effect. It was pure chance, just as I was dialing in my own system here. Anyway, I hope that helps. Let me know in the comments how it went for you. I'm very curious, and let me know what speakers you have. Let me know what system you have. I want to know about your processor, your amplification. Give me details of your room. Run through it. Let me know what you heard as you went through this process. Take a day to do this. I mean, this, for me at least, is a ton of fun. And then, here comes the real fun part. After you get it all dialed in, I guarantee you, if you've had a big difference, you're going to go back and start to listen to a whole bunch of other stuff. Anyway, that's it. Share the video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe if you're not, and we'll see you next time.